Yo, what's up, guys? That was a super energizing introduction. Today I'm actually joined by Cole Walmsley for this podcast, who is a very interesting guy. And like the podcast before this one and the podcast before that one, Cole was also present at the retreat which I visited. So I kind of um, want to get these guys on because they're super interesting. They have a lot of valuable knowledge, which I think is super interesting for you to listen to as well. But anyway, today I'm joined by Cole. And yeah, man, I'm really happy to have you. Can you maybe introduce yourself to the listener and maybe tell a little bit about what you do, so we can kind of take this started?
Sure, yeah. First, thanks for having me, Hoos. Always a pleasure to be conversating with you and your being. Happy to be here. And a little bit about me. I live in Austin, Texas. Moved here a few months ago. I do a lot of writing. Writing a book about Bitcoin, working with a marketing agency that works with Bitcoin brands, and as Mr. Jack Sweeney, I like to call it based brands on X, help them gain organic attention and go viral so that people can become aware of what they're doing because it's important. And that's what they want to do. They want to be seen. And I do a lot of writing on my newsletter. I write on Twitter myself, and I coach basketball in my free time. I like to play sports and do all sorts of different things. My background starts really for me when I decided not to continue my traditional education path. When I was 18, decided to take a gap year and not go to college straight out of high school, which led to me moving to Florida from Northern Virginia to go play poker pretty much professionally.
Wow.
Which led me into investing, and then that led me into crypto, then that led me into Bitcoin, and so many other things sprung off of that. But it was really that decision to kind of break away for the first time and bet on myself and go down my own path, tap into my unique nature, that the magic really started to unfold from there.
Well, that's super interesting. Actually, many things that you just mentioned are like new to me. I thought based on because for the listeners' context, we talked quite a lot at this retreat. Obviously, it was just a few days, not probably enough to learn your entire life story. But some of the things were quite interesting. The first thing that stood out to me was that you coach basketball in your free time.
Yeah.
Bro, tell me more about that. Like, has that been a passion of yours for a long time, or?
Yeah, I've played basketball pretty much my whole life. Like, as far back as I can remember, it was my main sport year round. You know, playing point guard, floor general, etc., and always loved watching the game too outside, and still do love watching the game and playing as well. I'm fascinated by it and fascinated by sports in general, like I mentioned. But yeah, I started coaching in middle school when I was about 13, 14 as an assistant with my dad in a recreational team, and then was 3 years as an assistant. Then I became a head coach with my friend in high school. We coached some freshmen and sophomore high schoolers, led them to the championship, which was a ton of fun. Completely volunteer position, didn't get paid. And yeah, it was just one of those things that was super fulfilling, connected with my heart, and I was like, man, that was so much fun after I finished the year. The next year I was a player coach. So I was the head coach, but I was also a player on the team. We didn't have like a dad or somebody traditional coaching. So it was pretty unique in that sense. And then we ended up winning the championship. And yeah, this past year when I got to Austin, I was thinking of things to do to kind of branch out and spread my wings early on, because I found that in Jacksonville, along my 4 years there, when I started to spread my wings out, that's when things started to manifest in super special ways, and I started to expand. So I figured, let's just get that ball rolling as soon as possible when I got to Austin. So I started searching for different positions, more like juice shop, smoothie shop, just to, I don't know, get out and interact, but didn't really connect with me. Then I found a coaching position at this facility called HCI here in Austin, and it was $20 an hour to go coach basketball. I was like, sold. I'd do it for free. So I sent in my application and had the interview, and we just wrapped up our first season coaching a youth league, which was kind of a unique setup there. But now, actually this weekend, the first week of March, I'm going to be coaching a 7th grade select team, so it's going to be more competitive, and we're going to have tryouts and going to be traveling to San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, all over Austin and coaching basketball. So yeah, it's one of those things that kind of serves as a balancing act for some of my other stuff, to go out and give back, and it's something I find immense joy in. It's very stimulating. Building relationships with young kids is super fulfilling for me, and it's awesome to see the impact that you can have on kids at such a young age, and they can come back to you. I've had kids that I've coached in the past that have come back to me and shared how much essentially their my relationship and my energy has meant to them. I've had parents say the same thing. It's just like fills me up to the max, so it's worth its weight in gold.
Damn, bro, I'm so glad I asked, because like that makes me feel good as well. Just that energy that you bring to this answer. I'm curious. A little bit back, you said that things really started to like manifest positively for you when you started to spread your wings. What essentially did you mean with that?
Yeah, for my first couple years, because I moved to the city not knowing anybody. I'd basically never visited the city. I spent a weekend there in June of 2020, but I played poker and then stayed, half a mile away at a hotel, and that was it the whole time. That was all I explored in Jacksonville. So I moved down there a couple months later to a house in Ponte Vedra, which is right next to Jacksonville, with two roommates that I had never met, that I stumbled across on Craigslist. And yeah, I didn't know anybody. So I was just kind of in my shell and really learning how to be in my own space first, and kind of integrating all of the learnings there. But then once I started to get out and explore things outside of myself, like one of the main things that I did was I joined actually 5 Toastmasters clubs. And then that led me to, building relationships with people that I met there, starting to go in the arena, so to speak. And
what is a Toastmasters club?
Toastmasters. It's where we learn to cut bread and put it in a toaster really efficiently. I'm just kidding.
I was like, what?
I'm just kidding. You mastered the toast. No, it's a public speaking practice, essentially. So it's an international organization.
I did not expect that either.
It's really awesome. There's Toastmasters clubs in more countries than there are McDonald's in countries across the world. So it's really massive. It's all over the world. It's been around 100 years. I actually ended up becoming the president of one club, and that was 2024. Last year was the second half of my term, and that year was Toastmasters' 100th year in existence, in operation. It started in 1924, and it's been around ever since then. So it's got the Lindy effect going for it. But yeah, once I started to join some Toastmasters clubs, I started meeting really cool people, like-minded, started building relationships, sharing ideas, learning new things, socializing, getting acclimated with the city, going to different clubs. It was good, yeah. So I figured, let's do those types of things. I haven't joined a Toastmasters club yet here in Austin, but I wanted to just do those types of things when I got to Austin.
Okay. So you say that like spreading out your wings, because I kind of have to go back to the initial question.
Yeah.
For you was just putting yourself in these new environments, exposing yourself to these new opportunities.
Yeah, pretty much. That's just like expanding, because I can sit in my room and meditate and do research on my computer and read books, journal, all sorts of stuff. But that's kind of just within myself. To spread my wings means to like kind of get out into the world a little bit, come out of the cocoon, so to speak, and to share and to connect with other people. And then, yeah, that's when I tend to find the most magic starts to happen, and new, because you're picking up on new human energies, and those things kind of unlock new insights and wisdoms within me. And then I can go back here in my quote unquote cocoon, just, in my home here, and integrate, and then, it kind of feeds on itself back and forth. So yeah, that's what spreading my wings means, just like trying new things, exploring what's out there, getting out of the cocoon.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, man.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing which I actually wanted to bring up was something which I just read on your X feed about J. Cole. The tweet you put up, a little bit of context for the listener, it was basically about that you said that J. Cole, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I just skimmed it briefly, but was actually a rapper that, despite rising to big heights in terms of fame and success, still remained authentic and did not, you could say, did not almost sell himself to fame or money or status or whatever, and just kept focusing on the music itself. Which is a topic that really resonates with me, because I think that everyone has a unique path. I think, like you mentioned before, really that uniqueness, that individual path of yours. And I think finding that and following that is pretty much like the only the only mission you have, you know. So I'm curious to bring this back to you, Cole. What would you say has been the kind of story up until this point for you to find your own path? Have you found your own path? Are you on what you would say your individual unique path? And if so, how did you get there?
Big questions. So my nature, and astrologically, my nature as the stars, right, say that my path in this lifetime is to communicate and craft a vision for humanity and help us get there through the written language, through the spoken language, and really to share my vision and my insights that I receive in some way, to express it externally, and to share what I learn and pick up on and download, etc. So I think that's kind of my unique path, is one, what I'm sharing, and two, how I'm sharing it. And those things are continuing to unfold, and they always will be. I think I've been on my path for 5 years, 4.5 years, ever since I made the decision to not go to college, which is the first time I thought about dropping out of high school, but never really entertained it because there was a lot of friction there. But once I started to follow my heart, and it was like what was really speaking to me, that's when I started to go down my unique path and tap into it. And that has led me to things that I'm naturally interested in, like poker, but it also led me into investing and money and capital, and kind of playing that game, which fascinated me because I'm a big math guy, data, analytics. I like numbers, finding optimal strategies like poker. And investing was a big game, which led me to stocks, which led me to crypto, which led me to make a bad investment, which led me to sell everything, which led me to spending 11 months straight researching where was the best place to put my money, which led me to Bitcoin, which led me to one of the primary ways, at least in this chapter of my life, that I'm going to be expressing myself and what I'm learning is what I've learned about Bitcoin, because I think it's so profoundly significant and beneficial for us as individuals, but all of us collectively as well. And that started because I started following my unique path, and it'll continue to unfold, and I'm excited for it, but that's pretty much how I've gotten here.
That's amazing. I love how you pretty much connect all of these dots, because I think there's also a quote from Steve Jobs that says you can only connect the dots looking backwards, so like not trying to connect them forwards, which I think, as a quick side note, is quite a good lesson for people, because often our mind likes to predict the future, but it's better to just not waste time trying to predict the future or trying to look at the past, in my opinion, but better just to take action in the present. And occasionally, if you do need the information from the past, it's going to show up when you need it as well. That's a kind of a sudden wisdom insight slide I would want to touch in here. Yeah, man, let's talk Bitcoin, because this is obviously a big passion of yours, a big thing that you're working on right now. For people who are not very knowledgeable in this field, and I would say I'm not too knowledgeable. I do know, like, and now I have to be careful, otherwise I'm going to get a lot of specific questions. I think I do know like the basics of Bitcoin and crypto. Separating them, of course, because for the reader, absolutely do not combine Bitcoin and crypto. I'm sure that Cole will tell us in a second why. But secondly, yeah, man, just why should people care about Bitcoin?
I don't think people like should care per se, but I think for me it's been beneficial to understand what Bitcoin is about and really what money is about. That's the foundational understanding with Bitcoin. If you're gonna pursue learning about Bitcoin, first pursue learning about money and what it is, because Bitcoin's attempting to be money. So money, simply put, is a medium of exchange. It's what we use instead of bartering. That's pretty common knowledge. Most everyone would agree with that. But it's also a unit of account. It's like when we go in a grocery store, everything's priced in a money. That's how we denominate economic goods and services. But thirdly, it's also a store of value. It's what we receive for the energy that we give. It's the energy we receive often for the energy we give. And then we store it over time so that, tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, we can tap into that energy that we've received and then give it to somebody else to receive a phone, a plant, groceries, a car, whatever it is. So really it's just a form of energy that we use to transfer over three spaces. It's over space itself, scales, and time. So it's over three domains: space, scales, and time. And that's how really we can evaluate how good a money is how well it transfers energy over those three domains. So like if we were to use boulders as money, it wouldn't really serve very well over space because it'd be super burdensome to carry with us as we're going down the street, across the country, wherever. It doesn't really make sense. So we don't use boulders, we don't use sofas, we don't use big items that are physically cumbersome. Second is scale. So it has to be divided up. So we can buy as small as a pack of gum with it, but it can also be grouped together so that we can buy a house. So it has to be divided and grouped together up and down and up the economic scale. So again, like big physical items don't serve well for this, like a house or even like a shoe. What are we going to cut a shoe in like two different parts? It just doesn't really make sense. And then third, and this has actually been money's historically most difficult trait to achieve adequately, is over time. So how do we receive something and then ensure that its value, really its energy, is adequately stored over time so that we can harness its full energy as we received it when we go and give the energy down the line to somebody else. So any physical item is quite difficult to use globally as money. This is why gold failed ultimately as money, because if Britain wanted to send the United States gold, well, they have to get on a ship and it takes a couple of weeks. Well, what if the ship goes down and goes in the water? All the gold is lost. All sorts of problems come with that over space specifically, but also over scales, because you have to chop the gold in half if you want to use it, half of it, and it's just a little bit difficult. So we started using paper money that was backed by gold, because paper is easier to send, and you can even tell the bank, hey, I'll give you this, and the paper will be tracked on a ledger. Some bookkeeper will keep track of it, but it's easier to take with us across space. It's easier to group together. It's in conjunction with coins. It can be easier to use across scales. But the main flaw with paper money was that first, the paper money gained credibility because it was backed by gold, and gold was incredibly good at storing monetary energy across time because it's incredibly scarce. It's hard to find in the ground. It doesn't deteriorate. It's very durable. It lasts over time. Like if we used apples or fish, they would rot and decay. No good. So
I love these examples, by the way.
Yeah, I think analogies are really important to use when discussing abstract concepts, and Bitcoin is such an abstract concept, so it helps, at least for me, to connect something like an apple that I already have an understanding to what money or Bitcoin is, to bridge the connection. But anyway, so gold didn't really work so well, even though it stored energy over time, and it's still the biggest store of value by market cap today. because it's incredibly scarce. But we wanted to expand our economy, start trading with other countries across our country, whatever it is. So we started using paper money to make it easier, backed by gold. So I had $10 that could be redeemed for 1 ounce of gold, let's say. I could go to the bank and give them my $10, and they would give me a certain amount of gold. Great. But then what happened is, in short, what happened in the United States is this group of elite bankers went down to this island in the United States called Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. And it was a completely secret meeting. Nobody knew about it, but they organized and got together to scheme up and draft a plan to create a centralized banking system where one centralized monetary structure would control the issuance of money. They would be able to manipulate it to their will. And I believe they had a senator that was at that meeting as well. And then in 1913, they adopted the Federal Reserve Act, and that created the central bank for the United States. There's connections to the Bank of England, which has connections to the Rothschilds and all sorts of this monetary history that's been mostly undercover for a long, long time. But this gave them the ultimate power because they were able to print money at will, and they ended up removing, in short, the gold backing. So they didn't have to, for every $10 they printed, they didn't have to have 1 ounce of gold. They could just print endless amount of money, however much they wanted, and that money they mandated to be used through legal tender laws that state, well, you have to pay your debts and your taxes in the US dollar, for example. And if you don't pay your taxes and your debts, of course, you get fines, you get penalties, you can be put in jail. So it's essentially a coercive measure that these governments and central banks enact upon us to mandate the use of their currency that they control. And this allows them to print energy at will, which is an incredible power and actually breaks a fundamental law of the universe, which states, the first law of thermodynamics: energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. But they're literally creating monetary energy by typing a few numbers into a computer. That's how it works nowadays, and creating trillions of dollars. That's what they did during the coronavirus pandemic. It's what they do most years. It's incredible. And so this guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, some alien, we don't know, saw the manipulation. Pseudonymous. We had no idea who the actual identity of Satoshi Nakamoto is, which is really cool and adds to the essence of it. But we'll say he's a he, and we'll say Satoshi, he did see the manipulation that was being run by these central bankers and governments. They were bailing out banks. This right after the 2008 financial crisis, where banks before that leveraged the economy. We have money here, but we also have it here, and here. And so when one person got it here, all of these other people didn't have their money, and it just blew up the entire economy. Well, then these banks didn't have their money, but then the government came in and bailed them out. They printed money, gave them to the banks, kept the system solvent to prevent the whole system from collapsing, as it really should have, because it failed. It should have collapsed. But they backstopped it with newly printed money, which debased average people's money. And so Satoshi Nakamoto saw this and created Bitcoin, which is a digital money, right? So there's no issue across space because it's just purely digital. It's like me and you having this conversation over the internet right now. There's no real physical burdens to it. I mean, we have a computer and we have hardware, but we're transmitting information across an ocean and land, thousands of miles away instantly because of the internet. It's digital information. It's ones and zeros, really, that are being transmitted right now. So Satoshi created a digital money that was good across space and scales because it's digital, but was ultimately the best across time because it was a finite, absolutely scarce amount of Bitcoins, amount of money. And so this means that by storing your money specifically your monetary energy within Bitcoin, your energetic stake within that system will always be full and complete and can never be debased, because the supply of Bitcoin can never be debased beyond 21 million Bitcoins. So if I have, let's say there's 100 houses in the world, and you buy and own 10 houses, well, you have 10% of the energy within that system, right? So if 100 new houses are created, there's now 200 houses. You still have your 10 houses, but now you have 5% of the energy within that system. So now your energy has essentially been debased and devalued because of the increasing of new supply. Bitcoin fixes this because there's only 21 million Bitcoins. If I have 10.5 million Bitcoins, I'll have 50% of the energy within Bitcoin always and forever, which means my monetary energy that I store in there is perfectly and adequately stored for as long as Bitcoin exists, which is really the ultimate goal for us storing monetary energy. We want 100% of our energy to be stored. But most importantly within Bitcoin was that Satoshi designed it so that it couldn't be manipulated by a central party. There was nobody first in between a transaction between me and you, who's, if I send you money, there's no right for somebody to be in the middle of that and say, no, you're not allowed to send who's money. Well, it's an agreement between you and I. It's not an agreement between me, the bank, and you. Mm-hmm. If you offer me a product and I want to pay for it, I can pay you for it. So Satoshi created that. It's peer-to-peer, just like cash, right? If I gave you cash, there's no bank that can prevent that. But now he created electronic cash, digital cash, using the internet, that nobody can stop in the middle, but also that the wider system, the wider network, can't be manipulated by a central authority, so that they can come in, change the rules because they have a ton of power, and then say, well, now there's 42 million Bitcoins. They can debase the supply, they can erase people's money out of the ledger like banks can do today, they can freeze people's account. It doesn't exist in Bitcoin. It's decentralized by design so that nobody can manipulate our energy, but specifically our monetary energy. And it's the most secure form of this money. It's, an absolutely scarce form of money, and it's the most secure, absolutely scarce form of money. So it's the most secure, best place to store your energy. And that's why ultimately it'll be adopted. It's not only the best place to store it, it's also the best place to spend it as well. And transfer. It's really just the best place to transfer monetary energy across space, scales, and time. And it's the most secure way. And that's why it's been the best performing asset of all time. And that's why it's being converged upon right now globally. And that's why it will be converged upon.
Well, man, I'm really inspired to just hear you talk about this topic, because I know that you spend probably a lot of time trying to understand it and form your own opinion on it. Mm-hmm. And it's no coincidence that you just had like a debate with a guy and even the tweet I just read for the listeners' context was about a debate between you and another guy on Bitcoin versus crypto. And even in the way in which you just talk about these topics and explain your arguments is fascinating, man. I would not want to be in a debate with you talking about Bitcoin or crypto, but I do want to listen to you, hear you talk about it. I'm curious because you said that Bitcoin has 21 million currently. Mm-hmm. That is that called like the market cap?
So the current supply is not 21 million, but ultimately it will get up to 21 million Bitcoins. And then the market cap is how we denominate it today, is how much dollars globally have been assigned and put into that system. So it's about $2 trillion worth of monetary energy in today's system that Bitcoin is supposedly worth in, as they call it, fiat terms, which is just like currencies controlled and created by governments and central banks are fiat currencies.
Gotcha. And I guess the main thing which arises in me when you talk about this as like the vision of using Bitcoin as a like centralized, decentralized money exchange, mm-hmm. currency, to put it like that, is that probably the main entity that's going to be opposed to this is probably the government, right? So how do you see this transition happening? And yeah, obviously it's a bit of playing with potential realities in the future, but yeah, it's quite maybe interesting to hear from you how you see this transition happening.
Yeah, that's a big topic as well, but we're seeing it happen right now as we're entering collectively. Humanity is a massive awakening period, and it's actually funny because there's a lot of parallels to the early 1500s and the monopoly between church and state and the manipulation of information and control that was true back then, where the church was in bed with the state was in bed with the church. So the example, the Roman Catholic Church at this time in Europe had a ton of power, but it also it used the government, the state, to make rules and manipulate citizens to give the Roman Catholic Church more power. So an example was the sale of indulgences, where I would, let's say, make a sin, but then I can go to the church and pay them money, and then the church would say, you're sin-free, which is insane. It's absolutely insane. But because information back then was so not decentralized, had such a tight funnel of where it streamed through, because the church and the state were mostly responsible for creating and distributing information. That's where they learned from. They learned from the church and the state. The academia back then was primarily funneled through the church and the state. There wasn't as many other people publishing new things from all sorts of different sources. So the main source of information that people were receiving were from the people in power who had a monopoly of power and used it to their advantage, and really it was an abuse of power. So the people, one person specifically, Martin Luther, saw this abusive power and was like, I don't like this. This is, I want to revolt against it. So he wrote this document called the 95 Theses that outlined all of the issues that he had with the monopoly of power between church and state. He walked up to a church in Germany, slapped it to the front door, and said, this is my manifesto. This is the issues that I have with this current system. I want to wake people up to it. And it wasn't really supposed to be distributed widely, but a group of German students ended up stumbling across this piece of paper on the door, and they saw it. They were like, this is really interesting. And then they used, and this is key, because a few years prior, the printing press had been invented for the first time. And so this allowed people to essentially create, publish, and distribute information in a decentralized way. Because if I had a printing press, I could type something up, print it, and give it out to many different people without having to go through the church and the state. So these printing presses were popping up all over the country, all over the continent, really, all over Europe. So these German students got a hold of it. They started using the printing press along with other people. They started distributing this paper, the 95 Theses, that highlighted the manipulations of power between church and state. And so then people started waking up. Whoa, this is something's wrong here. This isn't right. We shouldn't be getting abused like this. This is not how we should be living. And so what ended up happening, in short, was that the church and the state ended up getting separated. And so the church lost a lot of power, and a new form of governance sprouted. It was the modern day nation state, which is what we have now, which is separate from the church. The United States Constitution was built on this model and this idea of separating church and state. And it has a lot of parallels to today, because we have this monopoly between money and state today, where they can create money at will, and we have to use their money. And it's an abuse of power because they can print it. They can essentially steal our energy. But then this guy, Satoshi Nakamoto, decided, well, I'm going to post my paper to the internet. And then they used they, being humanity nowadays in the modern day, used the modern day printing press, which is the internet, to publish and distribute information in a decentralized manner, to where now people are waking up and saying, well, hold on, this isn't right. Something's wrong here. We're getting abused by these central banks and governments. And so we're going through this collective awakening period. And Pluto is in Aquarius, which signals a collective awakening from where it previously was for the previous 16-ish years, which started in 2008, which is traditional hierarchical structures, institutionalized thinking, and now we've moved into this Pluto in Aquarius where we start to wake up and really just awaken to what's really going on. And so you're starting to see people, individuals, it starts individually. Like myself, for example, 5 years ago, I didn't really know about Bitcoin. I didn't really care about it. Now here we are, I'm on a podcast talking about it and writing a book about it. I talk about it on Twitter. And so people are waking up to what's going on, and then the clamors for change within governments, the people that are in power, are getting louder and louder from that group. You had Trump for the first time go speak at a Bitcoin conference last year in the summer. He started appealing to Bitcoiners. And it may or may not have helped him win, but he's now in power. He's talking about adopting a Bitcoin strategical reserve. And ultimately, we still have a form of government, and the power structure at the top is still mostly somewhat controlled by the people, because the politicians at the end of the day run for office and they have to get elected by the people. So if they don't have the people's support, then they're not going to get into office, they're not going to be able to make power or make rules and have power, etc., etc. So they have to appeal to voters. And so now we're seeing the voter base get larger in both size and in volume to adopt laws, regulations, rules that appeal to the Bitcoin way of life. And as those clamors and roars get louder and louder, as more people wake up, then we'll start to see the change continuously shift and shift and shift. We're starting to see it more and more. There's a candidate running out in Africa, in Suriname, I believe is how you say the country, who's running on a complete Bitcoin standard, like separate money from state. Bitcoin is the way. Bitcoin's the future. I want to adopt Bitcoin as a country and start buying it. And she has a ton of support. And she's getting support from Americans, right? When most Americans wouldn't really care about an election going on in Africa. But because there's this huge grassroots revolution, really, to separate money from state, she's getting a lot of support, a lot of attention, and she'll potentially get elected into office. But that's essentially the unfolding that we're going through right now. That's stemming from the awakening collectively and individually about what's really going on. And we're starting to uncover what's been going on beneath the surface. And we're starting to clamor for change and a shift to a new order, a new system, a new way of life.
It sounds extremely exciting to me, man. Like, just the idea that you have this, you could say, like, fair money system makes me excited. What I'm kind of thinking about myself is mainly transition-wise, but feel free to just suggest any other topics as well about it. But what I'm curious about is, like, how would that transition look like? Like, because there's a certain amount of Bitcoin. You said it's not yet 21 million, but like expected to rise to that number. If such a transition, or when such a transition does happen, presumably, what does that mean for people? Like, do they have to like buy the Bitcoin with the dollars in order to get it, or do they just give it to people equally or unequally, or how would I sort of envision that?
Yeah, good question. So first, I think it's important to understand that because, for better or for worse, money is the foundation of our society today. It's the thread that's connected to everything. It's what we pay for to access the internet to hop on this call. It's how I pay for these headphones. It's how I pay for this shirt. Everything's really connected to money and the incentive structure that it builds for us. So it's the foundation of our society. And so if the money is currently built on one foundation and then we change the money, well, that means the entire foundation changes, which means everything that's built on top of the foundation will also shift. So that's a tectonic, globally massive shift that we're going to see, and it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly how that's going to happen and what it's going to look like. It doesn't mean we can't try to theorize and hypothesize and speculate, because it can be fun to do that for sure. But to your kind of second question, eventually, like right now, the way to get Bitcoin, there's multiple ways, but the main way is I have US dollars or euros, whatever it is, and then I go to an exchange. I give the person who's selling Bitcoin on there the dollars and the euros, and they give me the Bitcoin. Additionally, I could go out to the streets of Austin and start cooking burgers on a cooktop and say, well, I accept Bitcoin. And then someone can send me Bitcoin directly, and I can sell it for Bitcoin. So I don't necessarily need the dollars, but that's really the main way, is to exchange the current currency for the new one. But eventually, because all fiat currencies lose value every year because of inflation, the dollar is worth less today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The euro is worth less today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. All of these governmental centralized currencies lose value every year. Eventually, collectively, people are going to be like, well, I don't want to give you my Bitcoin for the money that loses value every year, because I know if I keep the Bitcoin, it goes up in value every year, pretty much, because that is a fixed supply that can't be manipulated. And so my energy is perfectly stored. Why would I give that up for a form of money that can be infinitely printed, and thus my energy infinitely devalued? So people are going to be like, well, I don't want your dollars. I don't want your euros. I don't want your pesos. And so once that happens, the exchange rate will just completely moonshot, because the amount of oh, well, maybe I'll give you a little Bitcoin if you give me like 100 million US dollars. Otherwise, I don't really want it. But then it's like, well, how much value does the US dollar currently have? Because if I can go receive the US dollar and then go buy, 100 houses and then exchange that for more Bitcoin, then I can arbitrage the trade, etc. But the point is that fiat is continuously devaluing, and Bitcoin is continuously appreciating. So eventually people are going to be like, I don't want this thing anymore. I only want this thing. And so a business, somebody that's working for a company, they're going to say, I don't want you to pay me in fiat. I only want Bitcoin. And so the employer, the customer, will have to come up with the Bitcoin to make them whole. And so then eventually it'll just be exchanged as money as it usually is, without a price on it. So we won't be able to buy it, but I'll be able to present value to the market and say, hey, I've created this new product or service. And then somebody will give it to me, which is really just what money is for. It's a medium of exchange.
That's when they clicked for me, because I was like, how would people get Bitcoin? But it's the same, how do people get money? It's like,
exactly.
you work for it, you create a product, you're nice to the universe. Yeah, man. Yeah, that's lovely hearing you talk about that. Let's just do a complete 180 and talk about sports, bro. Because
sold.
I really like sports myself as well. And I heard you say you coach a team, but do you also play basketball yourself right now in an actual team?
I play recreation. I play pickup. I shoot around. I like to dribble basketball. I have it in my hands, etc. But I don't play for any competitive team per se. Okay,
is that something that you're looking potentially to do?
I think in due time. I think right now at the chapter, it doesn't make it. This chapter of my life, it doesn't make a ton of sense. But I love competing athletically. I love playing really in a more grander way, in a kind of an organized, structured way. So yeah, I would love to. But I've played football recently in recent years in Jacksonville. That's what I did to scratch that itch, and it was the most fun thing ever. So I've played on teams recently.
Gotcha. By the way, I did actually have like a question about Bitcoin again, so we do have to occasionally get to this topic. Are there any restaurants, companies, businesses, whatever in Austin or perhaps in the world you have seen that already just, how do you say it? Like already just accept Bitcoin as a currency? And how well is that received? Do you already know of such examples?
Yeah, there's countless examples, more than I can count on both hands. I spent a month last year on this island called Roatan off the coast of Honduras, where last year there were 70 businesses just on that island alone that accepted Bitcoin. And I went to this kind of like farmers market thing where these Bitcoin businesses presented their products and services, and you could pay in Bitcoin. I paid for a hibiscus lemonade with Bitcoins, with Satoshis, and just sent it. I could literally, it's like just how you do today with Apple Pay. You just go like, boop, tap your little thing right on the thing, and it sends it right away. So, yeah, there's hundreds, if not thousands of businesses and companies all over the world. Even in the States, there's a company that I buy these kind of based protein bars from. It's it's beef, honey, butter, and
beef in a protein bar.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's delicious, and beef, honey, butter, and tallow, and those are the 4 ingredients. That's it. But they accept Bitcoin, and every purchase that I make with them, they give me Bitcoin rewards back as a reward for buying from them. So, and that's in the United States, and that's just one example. There's tens of businesses. There's companies in Austin that are built entirely around Bitcoin. There's a company that I co-work sometimes at this place downtown in Austin here called the Bitcoin Commons. There's a company, Zaprite, that is basically a payment facilitator, kind of like your Square, I think it is, or Stripe, where they serve as that payment facilitator, but they facilitate Bitcoin transactions. And I've used them to pay with Bitcoin just last week. I sent the person that runs the Commons, I sent them my monthly payment in Bitcoin using Zaprite. So they've accepted it, and it's being used currently.
Gotcha. Nice, man. I wanted to ask you something else. I think it kind of slipped my mind. I do have one. How do you see your position in this global transition to Bitcoin? What do you say? Because you obviously spent quite a lot of time on it, writing about it, talking about it, incredibly knowledgeable about it. And what do you feel is like your purpose in this transition, essentially?
We'll see. It's not like, for me, I feel called to learn about it, one, but also share about it, because I think it's so beneficial for any individual and really for all of us to learn about it and to adopt it. And so it's like, that's why I feel called to write a book. But it's also, I'm writing the book kind of mostly to myself to prove, and I'm really writing it to myself to prove that the Bitcoin thesis is legit. And that's why it's called the Bitcoin thesis. It's my thesis about Bitcoin to myself, that it is what I or others make it out to be. But yeah, I'm just going to continue to express and share what I feel called to. And if I become, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, influencer, I think the labels are shortcomings ultimately. But yeah, I'm happy to keep expressing and keep helping people learn about it, because I think it's super beneficial, like I said, and it's such a tool for freedom, and freedom is such a tool for us to walk down our unique paths and tap into our hearts and what we feel called to do in this lifetime and in this universe. So I think that's like the ultimate gift, is to tap into what your heart is calling for, and to sprout your being from there, to give your being from there. So and money, like I said, is a great tool to access that, because it gives us time to do that. Where it's like, all right, if I work 5 hours today and earn $20, I've made $100, right? At $20 an hour. So that means 1 hour of my work is worth $20. But if it loses 20% of its value over the next 3 years, well, then now my money is worth $80. And essentially, that system, the money that I've stored my energy in, has stolen an hour of my time because it's $100 to $80. And so it's like I've only worked 4 hours 2 years ago, but I worked 5, so it stole an hour. Whereas if it appreciated 20%, it went from $100 to $120. Well, now it's as if I worked an extra hour, but I didn't. So I receive an extra hour of time that I don't have to work to earn the $20 that then I can use to run a podcast, have a conversation, go to the gym, go on a retreat, coach basketball, do whatever it is. And so when we receive money and store our monetary energy in a money that appreciates over time in value, well, we're also receiving more time ourselves so that we can go and explore the things that we want to explore and tap into our hearts. And in that sense, we kind of have freedom through and for our time, and that's an immense gift. And it's been super helpful for me, on my journey to store my energy in Bitcoin over the last 2 years, 25 months. So 25 months total now. So it's like, I want other people to join me on the journey, and I'll keep sharing.
Gotcha. And the next thing that interested me was the fact that you're writing a book, and maybe to go a little bit away from the Bitcoin topic right now, and more towards the actual writing of the book. Because sometimes I've had these thoughts like, yeah, man, I'm really inspired, let me just write a book. I've actually planned it probably 2 or 3 times, but then when I actually get to do it, I feel like writing a book is maybe I'm not seeing it in the way in which I naturally should see it, if you know what I mean. So when I write, I get into this mode of like being a writer, like, hey, introduction, this is why you should read this book, basically like trying to fit into the usual author stereotype. And that's quite draining for me. So I'm curious, how did you get started writing the book, first of all? Let's just start with that question. How did you get started writing this book? Like, why actually write a book about it? Why not just share it online?
Yeah, so it's multifaceted. I think the second part is more true and why it's continued to go on. So the first part was that I wanted to demonstrate some proof of work and proof of expertise as a young person to potential investors and a potential investment fund that I was writing. So I was going to write about Bitcoin and why it's so important as the foundation of the fund and why it's significant and why investors should believe in it, so that they could see, okay, this Cole guy, even though he's 22 or he's 21 at the time, 21, 22, 23, he knows what he's talking about and has some credibility. But then it's really evolved, and when I started actually writing it, like, that's kind of how the idea spun, but when I actually started writing it, I was just writing to myself to essentially teach myself what I was trying to learn. And so it was like, I wasn't writing it for it to be published and for somebody else to read. And thus it didn't have like all of this external energy of like, well, what is this person going to think? What is this person going to think?
Yeah.
What is this person? And it's easy to get caught up in that still, especially as I've talked about it more. It's like, well, how are other people going to receive it? How are other people going to perceive it? And all the stuff that comes with that. But at the end of the day, I just come back to I'm just writing it for myself because I want to learn about this subject, and I believe the best way to learn is to teach. And one of the best ways for me to teach myself is through the written language. And so I've just been teaching to myself through the book, the Bitcoin book, because there was so many topics and so many fields within Bitcoin that I didn't really understand, but that I figured might be true and that I wanted to understand and penetrate further into to gain a deeper level of understanding. And so I would spend hours researching and then writing what I was researching to myself. So what I'm writing on the page is literally for me to read and be like, okay, now that I've written it and seen it, now I understand it. And if I don't write it to the point where I understand it, I'll change it, I'll edit it, I'll start a new idea, whatever it is. But it just becomes like a solo endeavor in that sense. And it's not like, oh, I have all these cool ideas that I want to get out there. It's like I just want to collect learnings that I've learned myself from myself teaching myself into one collection, a book, and publish it for other people to be like, oh, hey, he's taught himself this, and then in that sense it might teach them too. But we'll see.
Gotcha. I'm quite excited for it. Even though it is a book like almost written to yourself, you are going to publish it, like you mentioned. What what can the reader expect from it? Like, is it just going to be a book with your thesis and that's it, or are there going to be maybe some actionable tips or advice for people? Like, hey, this might be an intelligent thing to do, or obviously not like buy Bitcoin at this price or stuff like this, but you probably know what I mean.
Yeah, so I find it best, and it connects best even with me, but I also think with the reader, it's almost like a college thesis where you wouldn't use I language. Like, you wouldn't say, I believe that Bitcoin is this, this, and this. You'd mostly be using you. It's like, well, if you had this amount of money versus, well, if I had this amount of money. So I use the word you. It connects deeper with me because it's like literally I'm talking to myself, because it's like you. And then I'm reading the word you, and like you is like right into my brain. But it's just like for me, it's like, and I was kind of already at the point when I started it, but for me, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago actually, is almost when I started my Bitcoin journey. If I could pick up the book that I publish right then and there, read it front to back, close the last page and close the back cover and be like, I get it, I understand Bitcoin, I'm all in on it in every way, that would be kind of my goal and what I would hope a reader would get out of it too. And it's also from a perspective of using analogies, using things to connect this extremely abstract concept to already kind of understood concepts and understanding, so that it's easy to make the connections to Bitcoin and why it's significant. And so it's kind of in layman terms, so to speak, but that's also for me to kind of just dumb it down for myself to, they say if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't really understand the topic. So it's like, it's not written in 5-year-old language, but I want to get to that level of understanding where I could explain it to a 5-year-old really simply, and that's kind of how I've dumbed it down and understood it for myself through this book. And it's just like somebody on the street that has never really heard of Bitcoin. They walk into a corner store, the Bitcoin Thesis is right there by Cole Walmsley. They pick it up, bring it home, read it. Okay, Bitcoin, let's do it. I'm on board. Like, that's kind of my vision. Amazing,
man. That's so specific. That's when someone really has put some thought into it, when it's like clear and specific. Mm-hmm. Do you have a expected publishing date or?
No, and I've gone back and forth on this, and I'm starting to kind of go back and forth on this. So I was at a period of like, I want to have it published by this date, but then it became like my energy was towards completing it and finishing it rather than creating it. And it was actually after the retreat, I was in the Denver airport, and I wrote a newsletter on this, but I started playing a heart frequency as I was writing the book in the airport. And the first thing I felt was immense gratitude for like the opportunity and the blessing to be writing it, and how much love I had for it. But then I was going through like the release date in my mind, because I have a publisher that I'm going to be working with. I've already built that relationship, and that's ready for when it needs to be ready. But it was like, if I essentially conform the creation down onto a specific published date, like it has to be published by this date, it could potentially box in the ultimate curation from myself, which for me, I believe the universe called on me to create the book and the writing, not to publish it. And so my energy is focused on curating it, and then when it's been curated, it'll naturally be published. And so I kind of released the need for it to be published by a certain date, because it's like, part of me is like, oh, I want it to be published tomorrow so I could start making money from it and other people can start reading it, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, I don't think that's the truest, most resonant reason or energy from the universe for why I've been called to create this creation. So I'm just focusing on the creation and enjoying the process, and then when it's been curated, it'll be published. It'll just kind of happen. It's like step 100 doesn't happen without steps 1 through 99 first. So I'm just focusing on the current step right now and putting my energy into that fully and releasing. It actually also stemmed from what you said. I'm glad that this ran across my mind. It was what you said on the car ride back from the retreat, where you were talking about we kind of have these like energetic batteries within us, and it's always full, but we can sometimes hold on to these energies of like unfulfilled promises, unrealized goals, all of these future things that kind of like build up within our energy. And what would happen if we released all of those things? And then all of the space and energy that would create for us to be here now and to focus on what's present right now. And as I was driving, as you were saying that, I started to release some stuff, but then it was like the culmination of that insight from you in the airport to where then I released the need for a publication date in that airport, and then all of the energy that came back to me to then focus on the creation. So I must thank you.
Wow.
For that.
No problem,
insight,
man.
because that was amazing.
No problem. I'm happy I was able to contribute, because this makes me feel as well like, even though I might not directly have contributed to, for example, something like Bitcoin, I have given you the insight that led to you releasing the publishing date and perhaps allows you to put more energy into it. So a little bit of maybe some simple overview for the listener. The insight I gave Cole was primarily to do with your energy. So as Cole pretty well explained already, you basically have all of the energy already that you can take from the universe. The only problem that if you do not currently have a lot of energy is that it's being spent elsewhere, and you have to figure out where. Usually there's 3 things which take it up, and there's some other nuances. I'm actually building a school community, a small promotion, guys. Come on, this is my own podcast. I'm actually building a school community right now, centered around this topic of increasing your energy. So I'll probably put that in the description. But the 3 things are, first of all, unrealized intentions. This can be anything from promising your friend that you're going to schedule dinner with him, that you're going to schedule a call with him, that you're going to help your dad, your mom, that you're going to send this email, call this client. Basically promises that you make to yourself, as well as goals that you set but haven't worked towards. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to buy this specific clothing, whatever. If it's unrealized, it takes up your energy, because it's kind of like you are stacking it in this energetic field around you, waiting to be completed later. You're literally almost like creating a massive to-do list around you that's taking up your energy. The second thing is doing things that are not in alignment with your true nature. So this is not really something that kind of takes or gives, but it's more so doing things out of accordance with your nature is going to take away energy, and doing things that are in alignment with your true nature are going to give you energy. So the easiest way to get more energy, quote unquote, is not to necessarily try to get more energy, but it's to assess what are you doing and see like if it's actually in alignment with your true nature. Because you can be exercising, for example, running, but if you don't like running, then running is probably going to drain you mentally. So then it's better to find like a different type of exercise, like a sport, like basketball, for example. And the final one I had was, I think, about limiting beliefs and limitations. So this is a huge one. To make it brief, limiting beliefs not only limit you in the sense that they create a reality where that limitation is true, so they actually like prevent you from reaching like happier quality realities, but they also literally take up energy. So when you say to yourself, making money is hard, or I don't have the money for this, you're not only like affirming that you don't have the money, so creating this block, but this block actually also creates an energetic block, or like it takes up your energy. So yeah, those are kind of the three things I don't know if I told them to you in the cards specifically, but definitely the first one I did. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm happy to have had that contribution, Cole. Yeah, but I see that we're about an hour in. Maybe to wrap it up, I would like to ask you, Cole, for the people listening, and I would say, to be honest, I wouldn't have a clue what specific person is listening right now. It could be anyone from a guy who's 15, who's still in high school trying to figure out what to do with his life, or maybe someone who already is quite developed on his spiritual path or business path, whatever. So never mind, let me actually just scrap that question. What advice do you have, Cole, to, let's say, yourself if you were listening to this podcast?
Mm-hmm. Right now? Like younger self, or?
Yeah, let's do like to your past self when you were just about to drop out of high school.
I would say everything is always working in your favor, and always trust that, and always understand that that's always true, because it always is. And so it doesn't matter what happens externally, internally, the universe is always conspiring in your best and ultimate favor in every way possible. So surrender to that and tap into the flow of the universe, because once you tap into that flow, you tap into the flow of the universe, which is the ultimate source of power and divine energy and perfection and beauty that exists. And so true creation, similar to how you were saying, true creation does not come from force, it comes from flow.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
And so tap into the surrendered nature of limited beliefs, and surrender all of the limited beliefs, surrender really all concepts, and kind of go out and act as a beginner. Adopt a beginner's mind where it's like, whoa, what the heck is this thing? And you lose all concepts and just become a ageless, mystically curious, wondrous 3-year-old child again that just has an endless amount of curiosity and just wants to explore. And really that's what I would say, is just keep exploring without attachments, and the universe will always conspire in your favor.
Wow, man, I do have to actually clap here, because that was such a brilliant way of answering that question. You're a very good communicator, financial educator, human being. I'm really glad to have had you on here, Cole, and I hope sincerely that we are going to stay in touch in the future, talk a lot. For sure. I'm definitely going to keep watching you, especially for Bitcoin, because I feel like my financial development kind of wants me to also pay attention to what you're saying in this regard. So yeah, man, Cole, thank you so much for coming on today. I am grateful for all of the insights you have given to the listener, and the listener is probably also grateful for that. And I hope to possibly have you again soon.
Sounds good, brother. So grateful for
Amazing.
you, Thesis. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. For the listener, I will actually list out Cole's socials, probably as well as a link to your newsletter if you would want me to put that on.
Sure.
I'll also make sure to list out the community I was previously talking about. I'm building myself, as well as just the general social links, nothing too special. But yeah, once again, Cole, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for listening, and looking forward to seeing you in the next podcast.